Welcome to the D&D Fitness Radio Podcast, brought to you by your hosts Don Saladino from New York City and Derek Hansen from Vancouver, Canada.
Awesome. Hey guys. Hey Andrew. How are you? I'm Don. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Don. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Thanks. D, what's going on, brother?
Yeah, sorry about the Mets, man.
You know, it's we're used to it, but it was just an incredible, just a fun season to keep up with, right? Like it's just when your team's battling in that gritty, I just think it's so much fun. So, you know, what are you gonna
Who you
do?
got for the series?
I don't know, man. I'm not, and I don't hate the Yankees. Let me be clear here. I'm a New York fan. I'm a diehard Met fan, but I'm like show you the rarity. I don't hate the Yankees. I think LA is going to be tough, man. They've got a deep lineup. I'm questioning their pitching, even though it was good in the series. Is Yankee pitching a little better? Is Yankee relief kind of lousy? I don't know. I'm all over the place with it right now. It ain't going to be easy.
I think it's going to be a 7-game series. I think
Yeah.
To beat the Dodgers, you have to get to their starting pitching early in the series.
Yeah.
There's no way they're back in their bullpen is really tough, but they're also worn out.
They've also they keep forgetting that they lost several. Like they have arguably their 1 and 2 out pitchers, right? Kershaw and Ohtani. And how's Freeman going to be? Like how's his ankle? I think
know. I don't think another week is going to make a huge. I mean, he might be slightly better, but I bet he's going to re-aggravate it quick in the series.
I know. What did you think? Who's your team?
I don't know. I worked with the Dodgers, so but I don't really care anymore. I grew up in Kansas City, so they're out.
Yeah, but why wouldn't no? But when I say who's your team, like, are you a Royal fan? Like, would that be who you actually?
I grew up a Royals fan, but I worked in MLB for so long. I feel like I've just seen behind the curtain too much, so I don't really care one way or the other. It'll be a good series. I just want it to be a good series.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. Once you're around it so much, you kind of stop being a fan. I get there's certain things I'm not going to mention that I've been exposed to a lot of that just loses its luster.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's most of pro sports. That's probably most of entertainment. It's all of it.
So can you?
Yeah, let me start here. Like I met Andrew back in like 2019. We were in Dallas and he attended one of my courses and we kind of hit it off and we've been kind of staying in touch. And then now he's moved out of Major League Baseball. He can kind of give sort of a background on the teams he worked with when he was in the league. But now he's working privately out of Scottsdale, Arizona, and works with all sorts of pro teams, pro athletes in terms of providing rehab, return to play. So he has some very interesting insights, and we're gonna teach a course together in about a month's time in November, talking about a lot of this stuff. So he's introduced me to a lot of concepts around muscle oxygenation, looking at aerobic systems, as even for alactic sports like baseball. So I'll let Andrew kind of give us a bit of a background on his career and where it's taken him.
Yeah, shoot, man, strength coach right when I got out of school in baseball, but I went to school to be an athletic trainer. I actually did it because I thought it was strength conditioning originally. The joke was on me. So been a strength coach, an athletic trainer, oversaw everything in Atlanta. So oversaw medical, all the strength, was the rehab director in Atlanta. So man, worn a lot of different hats. Got out after 21. And that's when I started traveling and started seeing a lot of NFL guys at that point. And now it's a mix of like rehab, of hands-on stuff, of some guys I just do like at distance conditioning or either at distance like breath training. It's a mix. It kind of runs the gamut, to be honest.
So you're kind of almost like a problem solver depending on what that person is lacking. Do you have a PT background?
I'm AT, so I'm not a PT, but The irony, I think like all of my like mentoring, I would say, was all like chiropractic and PT. So
Yeah, I
like
get.
I don't I know how most athletic trainers are. I don't work like that.
No,
Um,
I mean, there was a few I mean, I owned a few clubs in New York City for years, and I had a group of PTs that was run by a good buddy of mine, Dr. Charlie Weingroff. And
I've known Charlie forever.
yeah, so Charlie, I actually married Charlie. I mean, I was in his wedding
Right.
party, and he's one of my closest friends. So, it's ironic how you get labeled, right? Like people call me a celebrity trainer, and I'm like, I'm not a celebrity trainer. I work with a lot of celebrities because I know what I'm doing. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I lived a little bit in that bodybuilding world, but then I worked in strength and conditioning on golfers, and I worked with Charlie for 12 years. So being able to live in that performance physique world put me into this really unusual category. And yeah, Derek, I do hate the celebrity trainer name. For some reason, all these tabloids and magazines just keep on calling me that, but it's you got to go with it. So interesting. So you got the AT background. You are
Yeah.
a strength coach, and you are just going to come in, assess a specific athlete, and just say, what are you lacking, or what do we need to work on with you to improve?
Honestly, that's probably the best way to sum it up. Like it really is. It's like it's just problem solving. Like guys fly in or all fly in. Like um, and that's what I'm looking for. Like, hey, what's your limiter, both mechanically and physiologically? Those are
Are you
the
are
big
you
ones.
trying to do it all on your own, or are you a connector and you including other people to kind of help like assist you throughout that process?
I've got somebody else that does like all of the blood work for me, and that helps me with training. Like I just had to pop out, and he's actually taking care of that right now. I'm in the process. Honestly, I'm trying to bring for sure another therapist on, and then we're just really growing out the business at this point. Just higher price point with athletes, but I also want to make it available to younger athletes too. So I need to hire some people for that. I don't have the time or bandwidth at the moment. So, um,
Congratulations, man.
oh, thanks.
Excited.
Yeah,
Did
I mean, one of the things that um, Andrew's done quite well is it's not just like Don and I always talk about like tech and wearables and all this stuff. And most of the time, uh, we're disappointed, I guess we could say, right, by a lot of this stuff. But I think Andrew has found a way to tap into some technology that really does help his process in terms of like verifying maybe what he thinks is the issue and saying, yes, okay, this is the issue. So I'll let him kind of talk about that with some of the athletes he sees.
Yeah, I think, and I feel like I've tried so many different technologies, but it is like for me, at least good tech is like, it's just affirming what the athlete's almost already feeling and they just don't know how to say it. That's kind of that's part of what led me. Like I use Moxy a lot, which we'll talk a lot about in the course too, but um, I don't know. Have you ever used a Moxy, Don? A Moxy
no,
monitor?
no.
So it's muscle oxygen saturation um, locally. Now, as you use it longer, you start to get a better systemic picture or idea of what's happening. Like how good is their intramuscular coordination there? And now if you start using multiple Moxies, then it's like, well, intermuscular coordination or even like upper body, lower body coordination. So you start to see like, can they utilize oxygen? Can they redeliver it or recover from whatever they're doing?
Can you even
Um,
dumb that? Can you dumb that down a little bit and just explain to people? A lot of our listeners aren't going to even. They've never heard of it. I've heard of it. I've just never used it. So can you explain to them exactly what that is?
yeah, so it's a little monitor. Like you're gonna put it like I for most people that are just starting out, like just healthy athlete, I'm gonna put it on their quad. And I'm looking oxygen is the energy in your body. I equate it to it's the gas you're using. Um, it's picking up some other measures that get a little more technical, but essentially it's like you're looking at your gas and then their gas tank. So how much gas can they use? And then when they are done hitting the gas, can it then refill with gas? And then the gas tank is more that gets more into like hemoglobin and myoglobin, and that's actually what the Moxy monitor is picking up. Now that gets obviously that gets pretty sciencey. But you get a lot of info from it, especially with injured athletes or just with athletes that aren't super fit, which I would say shockingly most professional athletes are way less fit than most people would probably think.
Yeah, that was the interesting thing, Don, is like he's saying you'll have like a certain athlete, and I don't want to get too specific here, but he'll have an athlete in who might be, pretty good athlete. But when he tests them on basic general fitness qualities, they're lacking, they're deficient because they're so caught up in the specifics of their game. So like I mean, I'm sure Andrew could talk specifically about pitchers, but okay, what are they supposed to do? They're supposed to throw a ball fast and probably focus a lot on the arm, but there's other problems within their body, within their systems. True?
Had had a guy last week that I just have a basic test I use on the bike. Now again, I'm looking for all of our systems kind of have a limiter and a compensator. So okay, can they use gas? Can they recover gas? Can they in a pitcher? I'm going to have a monitor on their forearm too, as well as their legs. I'm looking, can they divert blood from one area to the other? It's pretty important in pitching. Cross country skiers are really good at that. Very few of them can, but I mean, this individual the other day, I mean, he was redlined on a 20-second bike sprint. I mean, it probably took him at minimum 5 minutes to recover, like his heart. That's just his heart rate to actually recover from 3 20-second bike sprints. And it was like, oh, okay. And I know that's not sport specific, but that's kind of the point. Like we're looking for more just general fitness qualities because I think when we look at all these sports, and baseball is where most of my history is, but you have such a long season, and no one's thinking about like, well, what carries you through a season? Like with all that travel, with all the games. I mean, you're playing every day, like 2 off days a month. Um, your aerobic system, whatever we want to call that, like that's really what's carrying you through the system and supporting all that high intensity effort. Like if you're a pitcher, like it is high intensity effort. I mean, just mentally, they're creating a high heart rate on the mound. So that's a whole other discussion. But um, I, I'm a firm believer now that now the pitch clock went into place a couple of years ago in baseball. I think that's just added to it. But the the fact that the aerobic system has gotten like somehow a bad rap and has almost gotten ignored to some extent. Um, uh, I mean, it's a
It's
travesty.
like all sport though, right? Like because you were hearing it for a while, well, distance running, it doesn't apply to baseball. And I'm like, well, doesn't it? Like isn't if your aerobic system's better, aren't you going to have better recovery, better endurance? Why are we suddenly kind of
better,
bastardizing something that,
better
maybe,
repeatability, kind of
right.
important.
Yeah, 100%. So you reminded me of, actually, to bring his name up again, Charlie. Charlie created this term, and he did create it, but I want to say I was around when he did. We were joking. He would call it golf-ish, golfish, like GOLFISH. And I
Yeah.
remember we were in a meeting, and him and I got frustrated for a while because when I started in the golf fitness business back in, yeah, I think I was at the first TPI 3. So what was that, 2004, 2005? Long time. My brother was a
Yeah.
pro golfer. I was a collegiate baseball player. We were really into rotational sports. We had an understanding of it, but we really kind of dove into this golf fitness thing. Now, at a specific point in my career, I remember everyone like, it was like everyone like in golf videos, they're using the McKay golf grip. Everything's in 5-iron posture. And this was back in the early 2000s. So Charlie would just turn around and say, oh, this program, it's just all golfish. It was just like, Charlie talks.
They're very Charlie mannerisms. So
Yeah, it's just golfish. This is just all golfish. And he'd be all frustrated over it. And I would laugh, but he was like, just make a better athlete, create a better athlete. And I got that from him also. And then, as my career went on, I really understood. And I started seeing a lot of this continued golf training and it being, not to destroy all of it, but then TPI's posting pictures of like Rob Yang doing Olympic lifting. And like suddenly golfish isn't so golfish anymore. It was about turning these players into better athletes. And now I still see specific strength coaches who are holding on to this golfish approach because I feel like that's their differentiator in marketing, where I'm shooting a video for Golf Channel in a few weeks and there's nothing golfish on there. It's just like, no, body weight squat. They're like, well, why do you get body weight? Early extension. And they have to be able to get the tee in the ground and they can't lose posture. And they don't have these qualities. They most of these golfers can't maintain these basic qualities, yet they're trying to get on a Bosu ball and they're trying to just do this the entire time. And I'm like, stop being golfish is what I'm saying, right?
No, that's 100%. That's what I think. I mean, it really is. It's just bringing general physical preparedness back to the masses. It's like that's what Derek and I have talked about a lot. Like that's almost what you're feeding these pro athletes. Those are the buckets that are not getting filled anymore. And that's what what's old is new again. That's what Vern Gambetta did so well for so long. Yeah. I was lucky enough, I got mentored early on by a guy that was that had worked with Vern for a long time. So it's like, okay, it's funny because I saw what he was doing, this is almost 20 years ago now. And most of I ask all the athletes I see, the baseball players, hey, do you guys have hurdle routines that you do? Do you do body weight circuits still or med ball routines? It's like none of it. They don't do any of it anymore. And again, it's just making them athletic again. It's not challenging stuff.
Yeah, Andrew said there's like athletes that come to him who've never lifted over 3 or 4 reps in the weight room.
You see that more in football, but yeah.
Yeah,
at least college.
I think we just take things and we go too far with it, right? I've been now in this business close to 27 years, right? I'm going to be 48 in April, and yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember, oh well, if you want to move fast, you shouldn't do anything more than 5 reps. And you're like, well, isn't that just supposed to be a part of your training? Don't we want to still work on maybe 20s or muscular endurance? Or how about teaching someone who doesn't have that movement competency? And don't you need more reps to practice and get better at it? Why did we go so far away from this?
Well, that's something Derek and I have talked about. Like, as you get more fit, to your point about holding a posture, usually those things improve as their fitness level improves. All of a sudden they do have this capacity, but oh wow, I wasn't even working on that specifically. Yeah, it's just gotten, it's like youth sports. Everything's just gotten specialized more and more. But we're missing the forest amongst the trees.
I like that line.
Didn't I always heard stories about Nolan Ryan and Roger Clemens doing long runs and being very fit and doing strength work and all this stuff. Oh,
they didn't know what they were doing. What a joke, right? Think about it. I was looking at Nolan's stats the other day. What did he play? 27 years?
Yeah.
27 years? And the guy, and I looked up, sorry to interrupt, Derek, but I got to throw this in.
Yeah.
The most amount of pitches he ever threw in a game was 252.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
What is going on today? Right? We're just 70, 80 pitches, the guy's out. I'll shut up now. Crazy.
If you get to 100 pitches, there's some guys I've had that they'll take them to 110. If they get over 110, it's shocking. They might need an extra day. Yeah, that was a huge part. Even I've had some really good players in the major leagues that still did a lot of those things. A lot of the even running foul poles was a huge thing forever in baseball, and a lot of that stuff you're even starting to see kind of go by the wayside. It's not totally gone, but again, I think it just comes back to intent, understanding what your intent is. And I've thought about this a lot, just being in different leadership roles in pro sports. It's the easy thing to say is always well, people just need to communicate more. Okay. Sometimes you do have physical barriers within a facility too, where you just aren't able to see each other and communicate a ton. So but if you have a common language, which to me is physiology, if we can understand and be on the same page with physiology, and it's hey, multiple roads are going to lead to Rome. You can do what you do. I'll do what I'll do. And yeah, we're saying the same message without even saying it.
looking at this, right? So I just pulled it up because I wasn't sure about that stat. It basically says Nolan Ryan faced 58 Red Sox batters on June 14th, 1974, striking out 19 and walking 10 in a 13-inning no decision. He threw 278 pitches and struck out
Incredible.
leadoff man Cecil Cooper 6 times. So why do you think? I mean, Nolan Ryan's a bad example because he's just, in my eyes,
Outlier.
the most durable, probably the best, the fastest pitcher that we've seen. Um, why is it now? I mean, they are being so careful, rightfully so, with
Yeah.
these pitchers. But do you think are they getting hurt more or less than they did back in the 70s and 80s? And do you think like I mean, are they just stronger? And there's because I don't remember back in the 80s, I don't remember more than maybe two guys throwing 100, where now you've got 3 to 5 guys on every ball club that can probably top out at 100 if they want between the starters, middle relievers, and closers.
Yeah. I think it's very multifaceted. Guys are definitely getting hurt more and more. I mean, just the last couple of years, even UCL injuries are up from a few years before that, which is way up from previous time. I think, I mean, now like we can look at the pitch clock, I think is adding to it. Again, just I think that's just a piece of it. They took sticky stuff away. That's real. You have to grip the ball harder now, because there's no uniformity in how those balls are rubbed up. Like some places do a great job of it. Some places you'll go and it's just like right out of the package. So uh, that's been
That
part of
was
the
legal?
game. What's
That
that?
was that was legal at one time, sticky stuff. I thought you couldn't use any substance on a ball.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we could say it was illegal or not, but I can tell like I've been on teams that not almost everybody was using sunscreen and rosin, almost everybody. And like I've been on another team where it's like sunscreen and rosin, like you're in kindergarten if you're using sunscreen and rosin. They'd have like their own stuff made. They'd have like, oh yeah, yeah, it is super prevalent. And then it just got out of control and
Huh.
way obvious. Like when you see a huge thing of pine tar on a guy's neck or a guy takes it off and is like right in front of the umpire, like, okay, we've taken
You
that too
also
far.
gotta you also gotta think about, I mean, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, I mean, I think if a pitcher had 4 pitches, that was a
Yeah.
lot, right? Like you saw your traditional fastball, curveball, changeup, and then like were they throwing a slider? Like they weren't throwing ghost knuckleballs. You Darvish right now I was watching throw the other day. He has 9 pitches. So what do you 9 pitches? They actually
Yeah.
had one of the coolest layouts. They and I actually saved this, Derek. I'm gonna send it. I'll send it to you guys later. But it showed you releasing a ball and all 9 pitches coming out of his hand and reaching at home plate at a different time. And it showed the speed at the point they would reach if they were all kind of racing each other and what the pitches did or what they will do. And what I started thinking is what is that actually doing to the arm when you're always manipulating your hand or gripping the ball in a different position and you're always trying to doctor your arm, your elbow, your shoulder in a specific direction? That's got to be an incredible amount of wear and tear.
I feel like you could probably make the argument either way because that at the same time, like it's a lot of variability.
A lot of
So
variability. Yeah,
maybe
that's
that
just
is more stress resilience for him. Um,
opposed to if he's just kind of cracking his arm on a curveball and having
yeah.
that fall off the table over and over and over. Now, because he has that variability. Has you had any injuries? I don't even know.
He has had some, I don't think he's had an elbow. He's had a bunch of neck things, interestingly enough.
Okay.
But I mean, you look at like, I mean, I worked for the Dodgers. I came up with the Rays. They, what they do a really good job of is like, hey, if you have an elite pitch, like let's say you have a curveball that's like 3,000 RPMs, you're going to throw that probably 90% of the time, if you're like a relief pitcher. So like, there goes your variability out the window. So like in my opinion, like your career longevity probably starts to shrink more and more, but your success might also go up. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But I think that the specialization out of the bullpen is part of it. Guys are definitely throwing much harder, like on the whole now. Some of that is like, I mean, Driveline did a great job of this. Like, I mean, they essentially took what the track world had been already doing from a throws perspective. I mean, they're just underweighting and overweighting things. Now they can dial in some mechanical things better and better, but so like as guys are getting more efficient at that, they're throwing way harder. They're just mechanically becoming more efficient. But I did draft medical reviews for a decade, and I haven't done them now in 6 or 7 years, but by the end of a decade, it went from like seeing like you'd always have some guys that like, oh, this guy had a UCL in college. Like, okay, that's probably a high risk situation, where it's like, man, like now you look at some of these medical reviews, it's like doing a medical review for a 6 or 7 year major league veteran that's got all this chronic stuff. Like, well, yeah, he's got a lot of mileage on him, but now you're seeing that in like high school, college kids. I think that's a huge part of it. I mean, they're going to see strength coaches, and they're getting like personal coaching on the side from such a young age. They're not playing multiple sports. I think the level has elevated, but like you take that a step further, like the floor is essentially elevated, but in my opinion, now you're seeing the ceiling is going to have to drop off.
All right, now watch this. I was actually able to put in, Rob, if I just play this.
You should be able to play.
All right. Can you guys see this?
Watch where they stop. Fastball's going to get.
I wanted to share this.
But then you got to be able to recognize the splitter, which is slower, the slider slower, ball slower. All the different breaking balls have a timing issue.
So for a lot of people who didn't know what we were just looking at, I'll show one time. This is what we were just talking about. I wanted to share, but Darvish is releasing this pitch, and it's really 9 pitches that he's throwing.
Watch where they stop. Of course, the fastball's going to get there the fastest, but then you got to be able to recognize the splitter, which is slower, the slider slower, the curveball.
Big difference.
Breaking balls have a.
What do you have?
That's really
20-mile-per-hour differential, right?
that's what hitting is. I mean, it's really like just the eye's ability to pick that stuff up. You should look at an overlay. There's a pitcher for the Dodgers, Blake Trinan. There's a guy on, is it Twitter or Instagram, one or the other, that does it, Pitching Ninja, Rob Friedman. And I mean, he overlays a lot of guys. So, I mean, you're having the ball come out of the same window of that hand, and like he's going to have 20 inches one way on his sweeper, or he's going to have 20 the other way on his sinker, and that's coming at 97, 98. So you have to be able to pick that up from the exact same spot. Like I think hitting is the most difficult skill in all of pro sports. Now, I think the most difficult position in any pro sport is quarterback, but I think the most difficult skill is hitting a baseball.
I can believe that. No one really gives, I think, these hitters enough credit, because they don't necessarily understand, and they've never stood in the batter's box and watched it. I'll never forget. I think it was, God, it had to be close to 20 years ago. When was Herm Edwards the coach of the Jets?
Mm-hmm.
What year was that?
Probably early too. That was right after Rex Ryan, probably.
Yeah.
08, 09, 10.
Maybe even earlier. I don't even remember Herm Edwards. It's irrelevant. But one day, I think the media was just blasting the Jet players, and he turns to the media and goes, "Guys, we're gonna answer your questions, and we're gonna bring media down, and we're gonna have a one-day camp." So he brought down all the media. It was awesome. And
I love that.
Like one of the writers who was like beating up on all the players was standing there trying to catch a kickoff, and and like falling to his knees. It was like totally embarrassing. But he turned around after the cameras were on him and goes, "See, it ain't that easy." But it was beautiful. It was like, okay. And now, like, we're sitting here, and I'm subjected to it too. It's like 2 strikes. What the hell are you just staring that at? But when a pitch coming at you at 98 miles an hour, and it's starting, no exaggeration, 6 inches out on the outside of the strike zone, and it just kind of moves in at the end and clips the edge.
Yeah.
What do you expect?
Hang with him.
Exactly. It's
Hang
impressive.
with him.
Don, what's the fastest pitch you've ever been at the plate tried to hit? Yeah, what do you think?
Actually, I'll never forget the first time I faced 96 miles an hour. I was going into college, and I remember this because I faced a kid I was playing in the NABF World Series, and I remember, I think he played for the Enon Warhawks or one of these teams that we were playing, and he was like 16 years old. And he was like 6'6", farm boy, and he was like throwing 96 miles an hour. And I was like, damn, like these guys are good, right? And then when I got to college, I thought it was more natural to see, I played Division I, 93, 94. I thought it was pretty common, 92. Every once in a while, you had a guy in here who just peppered it. But I didn't really see a difference between 93 and 96 at that point. I saw guys throwing 92 that had an incredible amount of movement and it looked a lot faster. So I think that's so impressive about guys like Pedro Martinez. I remember watching him from the outfield and I could see his pitch move and being like, Jesus Christ, I'm watching this guy move a fastball from center field. What do you think that looks like behind home, like standing at home plate? And there were certain pitchers that I just felt like were just so much, better. Guys who didn't throw hard, like Greg Maddox. Like how the hell can you have a guy throwing 89 to 91 who were just so dominant? It's just, think of placement in that game of chess, right? I thought that was impressive.
It gives you an appreciation for spin rate when the guys that it looks way harder. I remember playing catch with Rich Hill, who anywhere from like 86 to 91, and I felt like it was going to take off and hit me in the face. But then you see guys that are throwing 100 that are getting peppered like all over the field, like barreled up. It's like that gives you the appreciation for spin rate. But Greg Maddox, like you take spin rate and now you also like he's really just messing with people's eyes, like changing their field of vision always, whether it's playing that horizontal game, like with his changeup and off of his fastball, or playing like the up and down game. It's an impressive skill.
Did you hear them there was something on social media recently, they were interviewing him and his catcher, and his catcher said, like, I never called the pitches. Greg always called his own pitches. I was like, I think Smoltz turned around and goes, yeah, the fascinating thing about Maddox was he was calling his own pitches. I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean he was calling his own pitches? And like Maddox, I think, turned around and was like, yeah, no, when I used to do this with my hand or how I would catch the ball. And I'm like, oh my God, like he got that. Like imagine that he's catching a ball from the catcher a certain way, and that was his sign to the catcher what was coming next. I mean, this guy was just on another level.
Well, when I mean, sign stealing's always been a part of the game. So like there's always games going on within the game, which is the cool part as you get a little deeper.
What's your opinion on that? Are you one of these that find that cheating, or do you just
I don't think that like now if you're using like an outside source to figure it out, that's I think different. Like I don't know the total depth of what like Houston was doing in 2017. It sounded very much so. But I mean that's been a part of the game. I mean, I remember even like high school that happening. Like if you're catching up a sign or picking up something that the pitcher is doing, like that's always happening like throughout a game. And like that's part of being a professional too. Like if you're tipping, like you better get that figured out because you're going to get waffled. Some people,
It's good. I'm not a baseball guy, so it's good to see you guys talk about this stuff.
I feel bad because I could just keep asking questions.
Yeah.
I'm in agreement with you. I feel like that if the pitcher's, showing his signs or he's letting him in too much, that's his fault. Like,
there's some people that are incredible at it. Like they just pick it up. It's really impressive. There's 3 players that come to mind that I've had that like, I mean, it would take me all day, and I don't think I'd pick up some of the stuff that they're just doing in a split second.
Well, what are these pitch comms now? I mean, I mean, they're wearing these, almost these like communicators between the catcher in their hat. And you always see maybe once every few games, there's a pitcher having a problem with one where they have to change it out. But if that's giving them their signs, right, then how the hell is anyone able to pick up on anything?
Yeah, now like if they're using that, I mean, that was the point, was to try to take that away from them. I don't know. I can appreciate it, but it also, again, it takes out some of the art of it all too.
Yeah. What's your from dominant pitching standpoints, who are the ones that kind of stick in your head? And I'm not necessarily saying the fastest. I'm saying the ones that have just given hitters the most amount of trouble?
Yeah, there's a few. So the ones that like I've had like on teams of mine, it's funny because I can go back to like Matt Moore is a reliever right now with the Angels. And in the minor leagues, he is one of the most dominant pitchers I've ever seen. Like he no hit maybe the best minor league team I've ever seen. Now, and he had a lot of success as a starter early, and then he had an elbow injury. Took him a while to kind of get back in more of a reliever role, but he was unbelievable. The one guy I think I've ever been in the opposing dugout and been like, oh, I remember seeing it had to be 2015. I remember being in New York. So in the dugout in New York playing the Mets. And so Harvey was pit. That's when Harvey was like won 18, 20 games. They had Syndergaard that year. DeGrom was kind of a no-name guy at that point. Nobody really knew who he was, but I remember seeing him and be like, there's something, and he wasn't throwing 100 at that point. He was throwing hard, but I was like, there's something different about that. And you could see it from the dugout. I've only heard 2 fastballs ever come out of a guy's hand from the dugout in a professional game. Aroldis Chapman, like you could hear it come out in Yankee Stadium. You could still hear it come out of his hand.
Yeah.
I think he was like throwing 104 that day. So, and this guy, I don't know if he played this year or not. It's quite a story about him, but Matt Bush, relief pitcher, another guy, short righty. I mean, Scherzer was one of the man, it's just had so many good people. I love Bueller pitching, like what Bueller did the other night. That's postseason Bueller. The 2020 playoffs,
Dominant. He's dominant.
Julio Urias, he's just cold-blooded on the mound in the postseason. And that's what you're looking for, like the guys that have success in the postseason. This kind of gets into a deeper physiological conversation, bring this full circle. But I always looked at like there's some really elite pitchers that struggle in the postseason, and they'll be Hall of Famers. There's that doesn't take away from what they've done. Everybody has a different emotional response. It's a totally different game, the regular season and postseason games. But then you have guys that elevate when they're in those tight situations, when they're in the postseason. Like Urias was always kind of that way. Bueller's that way. You're watching the postseason right now. Kike Hernandez is that way. Jock Peterson is another one of those guys that's that way.
Kike has impressed me. I mean, he's clearly plays to another level underneath this light. There's something about him in the regular season. You don't even know who this guy is. And then he becomes one of the more dominant Dodgers. And what's cool is like, he is later in the order, right? I mean, he's not one of these guys seen out early.
I think I kind of look at it on the carbon dioxide continuum, to be honest. Is that it's almost like they're the difference between getting hypoxic and like your heart rate elevates, you get a huge sympathetic response, or hypercapnic, where your breath actually slows. You get more of a cerebral blood flow response and you can control it. That's almost how I look at those guys that are performing at that high level in when the lights get brighter, where they have that ability, which I think to a point, I mean, it's natural in a lot of these guys, but to a point, I do think that's trainable. Maybe not to that extent. Like some people just have a propensity for it, obviously, and the ability to do that. But I think it's kind of 2 sides of the same coin. Some of those guys too are always interesting. Joe Kelly's another one that comes to mind. But some of these people need that kind of stimulation to also kind of level out. Like they're high. Those are your super ADHD personalities that then like that level of stimulation, like they're always searching for more stimulation. That level of stimulation is what like calms them. So it's almost like that's their Adderall.
Do you think that was part of Lindor's play? I mean, he was always a good player, like let's face it, but I feel like this playoff or this past half of the season, he really went to this superstar status. And I mean, it was that grand slam that he hit against Who the
Yeah.
hell was it? It was
First
the
year, was that Philly, I think.
Yeah, it was Philly. I was at a charity event. I left it because I couldn't stand not watching the game. And I walked into a bar by myself and I sat there and I saw him rolling up to the plate. And the second he hit that home run and he's running around the bases, he was floating and there was this calm over him. It almost reminded me of Matt Williams. You remember Matt Williams for the
Yeah.
Giants? And Matt Williams, there was a movie out in the 90s called Super Sluggers. And it was the greatest home run video ever because it was all these juiced up, players from the 90s. And it was showcasing all these like it was called Super Sluggers. And Matt, they were asking him all, how do you think you get your strength from when you hit home runs? And Strawberry's like, I think I get it from my wrists. And they're all like answering, they all have like these different answers. And they asked Matt Williams a question of like, what's your approach to hitting a home run? He goes, my home run is I hit the baseball, I put my head down, I run to first base. And they just showed him put his head down and he ran it. I remember watching this and thinking to myself, how freaking cool is this? Like this guy's expecting, like he expects to do that. And when Lindor hit the grand slam and they were like the biggest home run of your life, why were you this calm, cool, and collected? And he says, because I finally realized this is what I'm supposed to do. And I feel like that right there was this massive switch for him. And I feel like he went from here to like here. And it was impressive. And do you think it's, in a way he's saying to himself, I'm supposed to do this. I believe I should be doing this. And do you think he really talked himself into that? And when a player's flipping out and getting excited, maybe they're just excited and don't expect to be doing that? Like, what do you think the mindset approach is for a lot of these hitters?
That's a really interesting question because I think, and Lindor is interesting because he was elite. He hasn't played as elite until recently since he's gotten to New York, but that's the guy he was in Cleveland.
Right.
So was it just looking for the opportunity to use that? Almost, I mean, not that he's not trying to use it before, but that then takes it to the next level. Man, that's which I always liked, like Larry Fitzgerald. He catches a touchdown, he gives the ball to the ref. Act like they've been there before. Now the flip side of that is, man, a lot of Latin American players are like, when you see guys pounding their chest, that's like, if you've ever been to a game in the Dominican, I mean, it's like going to a college softball game in the US. Like they're chanting, they're just like, it's a total different level of emotion.
They're like kids.
Yeah. And generally speaking, I mean, this is just more cultural thing, but more Latin American players, it's usually much more of kind of an emotional roller coaster, which is, again, interesting. You have somebody like him, or I think of like Rafael Devers. I mean, there's a few guys in the league that are more of a calming presence as a Latin American player. But I do think there's something, usually guys that are like a veteran major league player at a high level. They have their personality, but they're always coming back. They rarely get like too high or too low unless it's, I mean, you obviously see some stuff in those situations. Like if they do, it's a quick bounce back to right where they were. And so they're always, and I think that's every sport that, frankly, that I've seen this in, like no matter what their personality is, there's always a regression or progression back to the mean. So it's like, it's very much right here all the time. Freddie Freeman's a great example of that. I actually had asked him before about it. Said he used to get super upset after like strikeouts. I can't remember the player he said that called him out on it. It is like, hey, you're gonna have three more attempts today, like 500 more this year. It's gonna be okay. Like you can't live and die with every pitch, every at bat. You have to move on, be in the moment, really.
Talk about a pure hitter. I mean, that guy, I mean, what's fascinating about that Dodger lineup is that naturally you take Ohtani and you put him in his own world, I feel like, because just what he could do from pitching and then the 50-50 club this year. I mean, the guy's the modern day Babe Ruth, but then, you can't sleep on two of the other best players in the National League, and that's Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. I mean, do you put those guys in top 5? They're definitely in top 10, right? I mean, hands down. They've got to be in that top 10 conversation.
I think Freddie's he's the most natural hitter, like just hitter that I've ever had. I mean, he can lit up. I had him coming back from an injury one time. I think this was 2017, and watched him if he took 5 swings in a day before the game, that was on the high end. Like there might be 3 people in a decade that can do that and hit 300 in the major leagues. So it's
Do you
like
think
there's
that helped him? Do you think that helped him, or do you think that worked against him? Because think about it, he's taking 5 swings. Why does he not want to tire himself out? Is he trying to keep himself relaxed before the game? Or
then I
you know,
think it was because he came back so early from an injury, to be honest. Now some of that is too, like pitchers always talk about this, like save your bullets. So it's like you have so many guys that are trying to hit themselves out of slumps and just hit. And I've heard Charlie talk about this before, like, you call that a slump, I call that metabolic acidosis. Like, yeah,
yeah,
I agree.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
You see that
I think
always.
I think a lot of the times these players do this just from that mental standpoint of like, and we got to admit it, like, are they getting that much better by hitting,
Yeah.
200 baseballs before a game, or are they just getting themselves into a good frame of mind mentally? Well, I guess the proof's in the pudding, right? Like, how are they gonna perform that given day? It's fascinating, I think, how any athlete, you can as good as these players are, you really don't know what you're gonna get, right? The best hitter in the major leagues this year hit what? 335, 340. I mean, that's for non-baseball lovers out there. I mean, that's a little bit more than 3 hits out of 10 at bats on average throughout the season. I mean, that's fascinating, right? It's fascinating. So think about the amount of times how much they are unsuccessful. And
Yeah. Yeah, you
I
have to be able to move on and move on quickly. It's but and I think what you don't see a lot. I mean, these guys are like ducks a little bit. The guys that are struggling, like even if they're not showing it, like there's so much going on under the water, under the hood. And like I've seen a lot of guys get overcoached at the major league level when they're scuffling, and then you just kind of see that snowball. So it is like their ability to separate sometimes, I think, is it's important. It's really important because it's just going to perpetuate otherwise.
If you don't mind, I want to ask an opinion on one hitter, and I'm not asking for anything personal. I don't even know if you know this guy or not, but obviously, me being a Met fan, I've always Jeff McNeil with his, winning a
Hmm.
batting title. What was it, 3 years ago? For those who don't know what a batting title is, it's the highest batting average in the National League or the American League. You win the batting title. So the guy wins the batting title, and then his numbers have been tapering off. I think he's an outstanding hitter. He's fallen a little bit short. He's out because of an injury. He comes back in. The coaches bring him back in, and they play him over Iglesias, who I think is a pretty hot bat at this time. As your opinion,
Hmm.
you're winning with Iglesias in the lineup, right? He's your second baseman. OMG, this whole oh my God crap that's driving every other fan nuts, the song, this and that, but he has a really great energy he brought to the table. Do you agree with the move of sitting a guy who's hitting the baseball really well to put a guy in who just doesn't have his timing? I'm not saying he's worse of a hitter than Iglesias. He's probably overall a way better hitter than him, but his timing's not there because he hasn't played in 40, 50 games. What's your opinion on that?
That's why managers get paid the big bucks. Well, you could argue front offices now. Uh, and this is obviously not knowing like the clubhouse dynamics or anything there, but I think you have a guy like McNeil. He also brings a different presence to the lineup. So
Yes.
even if Iglesias is the hot hand right now, like you have to respect that as the opposing pitcher that this guy's in the lineup and he could do damage on you, even if he's not 100% right now. So I go with that. Or honestly, if I was the Mets, I think I would have DH for their catcher. He seemed like an automatic. Alvarez seemed like an automatic out. So
But then he
that's
just out of
another
nowhere.
question.
It was weird. Then he just came back that game where he was just terrible and lit it up. I think he had 3 or 4 hits. I mean, he was just. That's what kind of made them so special. I think this year was this unpredictability, and it's what
Yep.
made it really exciting for fans. D, anything else? Andrew, really appreciate your time today, man. I could have talked.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to you guys go back and forth. So I just had one thing, like Andrew and I had sort of shared videos of like Deshaun Watson tearing his Achilles, and then there was a basketball player that tore his Achilles yesterday. And do you think,
Not official yet.
It's not official. Yeah, he looked back like somebody hit him with a baseball bat. Um, do you think that some of these issues we're talking about general fitness, blood flow, muscle oxygenation, are contributing to some of these tendon ligament injuries? I know you talked about, lower body contribution to blood flow to the upper extremities and all that. Do you think if somebody is lacking that circulation, they're going to be more susceptible at a connective tissue level?
I think absolutely. I mean, oxygen does. I have a perfect example of an athlete I was just working with. Like oxygen or injured tissue, for one, does not utilize oxygen, and that really is like that's our source of energy for healing, for anything we do. Like again, you can't rev up an engine without it, more or less. But like the flip side of that is you have to have the vasculature, the vascular network to support that. And what I think's like so important with all of that, like I was saying, I just had an athlete that like he was clearly fatigued. From the vascular perspective, what I was seeing, like his gas tank was small that day, just to simplify it. And your gas tank is changing every day. I saw that a lot with like when we would travel, gas tanks would shrink. When guys would, if we had a really tough emotional game, gas tanks would shrink. Dehydration, shrink. Injury, they shrink. Because it's almost like you have all these areas in your body that are having like mini asthma attacks. It's like the oxygen and energy is there, but then you don't have anything to actually use any of it. So again, not knowing the situation for uh, what was going on with like Deshaun Watson, or I think Wiseman was the player in the basketball game. At least it looked like he popped his Achilles. Like those are those are big things. Like if I'm seeing that before a competition, or like today, like practice, like, okay, we're gonna have to go about our warm up a little differently so we can start to increase, like, can we vasodilate and just get more blood to that area? I mean, that could very well have been part of it with, I think with a lot of athletes, that is in general, because as your fitness level decreases, or maybe you never built it in the first place, I mean, blood flow is a huge part of that. And that was Verkhoshansky's thing, which is why I like Verkhoshansky. Is like all this stuff that he was talking about 40 years ago. He didn't have the best methods to measure it, but like we can see that in real time at this point, but it's doing the exact same stuff. Like that's what he was trying to do. He was trying to build vascularity first. He was trying to move blood from an upper limb to a lower limb, or wherever. Like that's just becoming a more efficient athlete and more efficient performer.
Do you think there's a specific, I want to try and keep this question very basic for our listeners, but do you think there's we all know there's different types of energy systems training for different types of sport or activity. And of course, the question is always, well, what is the goal? But do you find that there is a specific type of cardiovascular training that a lot of your athletes are lacking in, or that might be universal for a lot of different athletes in different sport, right? Like there's maybe hockey intervals are different because of their line duration,
Yeah.
but like, is there a specific bucket that you almost feel like you need to put every athlete into because they need to train that energy system?
I was three parts, three short answers to that same question. I think like sustained isometric work
Yep.
across the board. I think every athlete needs it, and it's going to increase stroke volume of your heart. So it's like, oh, okay, like there's a lot happening under the hood, just with sustained isometric work. And then I think both tempo running, to be honest, like they're either not going slow enough, or they're never getting to the right gear almost in that instance. But
How would you define tempo running? Sorry, how would you define that from a heart rate standpoint?
well, for me, and I'm going to have a monitor on them. So I look at playing catch kind of the same way, to be honest, in baseball. So for me, it's like that 60 to 75% intensity sweet spot, where they can coordinate it. Like it looks coordinated. Because I hate when, like, hey, if I tell you to slow down, but you're just because it's way faster than me, like, no, you can coordinate that. So it's a coordinated movement, because a sprint, yes, it's coordinated, but you have to create a certain muscular response for that. You're like, there is a clear physiological picture I want to see with tempo running or playing catch that is not creating that. It's not too slow. It's not too fast. It's just like that perfect middle ground. And everybody knows those speeds, whether they're playing catch or running, they have that speed.
You think that's 60 to 70, that's 60 to 75% of your max heart rate? That's what you're recommending?
Just perceived intensity. I don't even want to say, I don't want to put a heart rate on it, because that is it's so variable. Like that's where I think like cardiac output rise and all that stuff got kind of misconstrued because of that. Like heart rate is your compensator. Like, hey, let's drive up stroke volume, and then all of a sudden your cardiac output it's 105, what was 140 before. Honestly, anything sustained is the third part to that question. So any sustain, I use the bike a lot, because most guys just can't run for a sustained period of time. I know, Derek, you're playing around with a lot of that stuff right now, just in your own training. So keep the RPMs, I keep those very high. And then, but the resistance is actually very low. So you're getting that, like, your heart is eccentrically elongated. It's getting more elastic. Where most of the stuff we do in the weight room or sprinting, it's the heart's getting thicker. So it's growing inward compared to outward.
Interesting. That's awesome. Do a whole conversation on that. Listen, I
Kind of ties
really,
into talent stuff too.
Andrew, thanks for your time. If anyone wants to find out more about you or what you're doing with your projects, could you let them know where they can find you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got Instagram. I've got a website, continuumhp.com. But yeah, then Derek and I, on Derek's website, we have a course coming out next month in first run of it's going to be in Scottsdale. So November, 16th, 17th. Yeah. And that's all through Derek's site. So, but yeah.
runningmechanics.com. So we have a listing there. So we have a number of people from Major League Baseball teams attending, and it's going to be a good show, I think.
And your IG is just Andrew Hauser? Andrew underscore Hauser underscore ATSC?
You're putting me on the spot. Yeah, I think that's right.
I'm looking right now. I think it's, Andrew underscore Hauser, HAUSER underscore ATSC.
Man, yeah. That's simple,
Awesome.
right?
Very simple. You got me as a new follower right now, so I recommend everyone give Andrew a follow. I mean, just quickly browsing through his content right now. I mean, you're great to listen to today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good seeing you
Yeah,
guys.
I wanted to connect the baseball brains here, so that was good.
He's the brain. I'm just passionate about it.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks, guys. Take care, Andrew. Thanks again.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.